Welcome to We Not Me, Inclusion in Action, the podcast that celebrates the many hands and hearts that make our schools work. From teachers and students to parents, leaders, policymakers, and partners behind the scenes, this show honors the people who show up every day to create a better future through education. Because real change doesn't happen in silos. It happens when we come together, when we lead with empathy, act with courage, and believe in what's possible. This is We Not Me, where everyone has a seat at the table and every voice matters. Let's get to it.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the We Not Me Inclusion in Action podcast. I'm really excited today to welcome TJ Hoffman to the podcast. He is the founder and CEO of Sibme, which is the AI platform that we utilize at the Inclusive Leadership Lab. And I am very excited to have TJ here because I really want to pick his brain and share the origin story behind Sibme. So TJ, could you take a minute and introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm TJ Hoffman, and I'm very excited to talk with you guys today. Long history in education. I worked for years here in Houston, Texas, working both as a teacher, a campus leader, and did a whole bunch of things at the district level in Houston ISD. I've been very interested in the intersection between technology and instruction for quite some time. And yeah, as Nikki said, Sibme was born out of a handful of classrooms with a bunch of us in the Houston area who about a dozen years ago saw the opportunity for teachers to learn an entirely different way, a way that was less prescriptive, less about, old sit and get PD sessions and that sort of stuff, and much more about reflecting on what's really going on in our classrooms. And so we started as a video platform, and since then we've sort of expanded to be a full suite of platforms and services that are empowering educators to drive their own professional learning. And we're thrilled to be doing that work and exploring how I can even fold into that work as well.
Yeah, so when I first discovered Sibme, I was scouring the internet. I was in a position where I was actually a supervisor of some staff members, and I was tasked with also being their mentor. And it was not working out well because that dynamic does not work. But we were in that position because we were so short-staffed. And I kept thinking there has to be a better way. There has got to be a better way because we have to support these teachers. It wasn't looking like they were going to stay, and they had great talent, and we needed to figure out a way for them to stay. And so that's one of the reasons that I started my business is how can we find this middle ground where administrators are not put in a position that they have to also be mentors just because we're so short-staffed that's what we have to do in order to provide that required support. And so I found Sibme, and I thought this is a great way for me to build capacity and provide that support. But I'm curious for you, what was that piece that you thought, I need this. This is the turning point for me, that I need an additional tool in Houston in your position.
Yeah, it was a similar situation where I was coaching 40 teachers at a big 6A high school in Texas. I was still on a campus at the time, and so some of it was capacity. It was just, I can't be in these classrooms enough to really get a clear picture of what's going on. But also a lot of it was just my own acknowledgement that I didn't know everything, right? And so I was working with, my background, I was a choir teacher, right? So I didn't know what I was coaching, HOSA teachers and English teachers and math teachers and all these sorts of things. And so I was like, well, I don't have the credibility to really come into your classroom and say, I know how to teach your class just as well as you do. And so I was looking for ways to make it possible for, the best example I have is, our nursing teachers on our campus. I wanted them to see outstanding nursing instruction. I was working with new teachers. And so there was no easy way for us to get subs and do all that sort of work so that they could drive up the road, to the next high school and see that teacher teach. So I was like, well, what if they could just watch them remotely? At the time, that was a pretty challenging technical thing. But I think that, it was really more born out of our belief that teachers learn best when they learn from one another. A mentor's job is to kind of like a traffic cop, protecting the teacher from the they don't need, and then sort of guiding them towards the things that they do need, really helping them build their own ability to sort of navigate the system themselves. And so that was really the thing. And so, yeah, it was this kind of dual mandate of the resource constraints of not having enough support for teachers on a campus, and then also the practicality of just knowing that I wasn't going to be able to know everything that a school needed. And so I needed to figure out a way to sort of crowdsource the expertise of all the people in our district. The last part of it really for me was the reality of walking in, watching a teacher teach, and, taking a bunch of notes, and then sitting down with that teacher afterwards and describing their class to them, and then having them go, that's not what's going on in the classroom, right? And what I quickly realized, especially with new teachers, is they're so caught up in just the particularities of what's the next thing I have to say? What's the next activity I need to get ready? They're just sort of trying to remember the next thing that they need to do. They have very little awareness of what's going on in their classroom. And I mean, I think practically, when I think back on my own time in the classroom, I'd like to pretend like that's a problem that only new teachers have, but I probably had that problem also. As I, even 10 years into teaching, I was still kind of, you go in and out of those moments. And so we have these blind spots, right? And so if I could expose those blind spots to people so that they could see themselves teach, it made the conversations a lot more fruitful, because we didn't spend half of our time negotiating about what I saw versus what they thought was going on. We were able to sort of look at it together and have that conversation, investigating a mutual understanding of what went on in the classroom.
One of the things that really stood out to me when I was looking at the platform itself was how intentional you have been about designing the platform so that it is supportive and not evaluative. There's no gotcha element at all to the platform. And I know, like, sometimes teachers might feel a little bit nervous about the video piece, even though evidence shows us that that is how powerful that is. But anyway, I just really appreciate all of the work that you put into making sure that that is supportive and not a gotcha. Um, but I want to talk about the AI piece. I think that's really important because there's a lot of different types of AI. And sometimes when I say that we are working with AI, people get really nervous. So can you, in a simple way, talk about what the AI is that Sibme uses?
Yeah. And I think, I recognize that AI is the most recent technology that's sort of made its way into the world. But I think we've always had a little bit of a hesitation in education to implement new technologies in our work. We want to make sure that it's not going to do more harm than good. We want to make sure that it's not going to make our already hard jobs harder, right? And those sorts of
Right.
things. I don't really buy this general feeling in that you sort of read about it in the news, that like people are worried that AI is going to replace them. I think by now all of us have had enough experience with AI to know that it can't replace people yet. And so, there's just no possibility there. So I actually think that the terminology shouldn't be artificial intelligence, AI. If I could go back and, if somebody would listen to me, but I'm not Sam Altman, so nobody's going to listen to me. But if somebody would listen to me, I would say we should call it AI. What it really is an intelligence accelerator. And what it's doing within at least in the context of Sibme, is it's providing an opportunity for you to move your way up sort of the Bloom's ladder more quickly, right? So if you think about just the data collection of observation, right? When I walk into a classroom, there's a lot of data I have to capture. I need to write down what's going on in the classroom. I need to look around at the room. I need to be able to see what the kids are saying, what the teacher's saying, all that sort of stuff. In our context, what our AI is doing is it's making it easier to sort of just roll all that information and get some output that's able to point out some trends in what's going on. I mean, I use this, I'm not a teacher anymore, right? But I use this all the time. I use ChatGPT. I use all kinds of different tools simply because the quantity of intelligence that's out there is so great that it would take me forever to go through all of it and use it in a meaningful way. And so then I'm limited to what's just sort of freely available in my mind. Well, I don't want that. I want to know what I don't know. And that's where I think artificial intelligence can be helpful. So like I'm still a little, honestly, like as somebody who runs an AI company, I'm still a little I'm not fully on board with the idea that like AI can do teaching. AI, we've all used AI for 25 years, right? I mean, like we use Google, we use GPS, we use Netflix to tell us what TV show to watch next, right? Like that's all AI. It's just content recommendation. This is a different way of interacting with it. But I'm not entirely ready to say, I can sit a kid in front of a chatbot and it's going to be able to then just teach that kid whole hog by itself. I'm pretty ready to say that, I mean, the internet has more access to information than I do. It's not all good, but it has more access to information as long as I'm still willing to use my critical thinking skills, my ability to sort of make decisions about the information that I'm provided with and saying, if that's junk, that's good, that's valuable. At least I'm getting a greater volume of access to information than I would have been able to get before.
Kind of how I've been describing this instructional coaching model is as a hybrid model. And I say that the AI tool is just a tool to start feedback, something to look at just to provide some beginning parts for reflection. It's not something that you would say, this is definitely something that I need to do. It's something to consider when you are looking at planning future lessons, or something to consider when you are reflecting on your practice. And it sounds like we're definitely on the same page as that. So for somebody who's never seen the platform before, and for somebody who's completely unfamiliar with what the Copilot can do, what can you give an example of some insights that the system detects that like a human coach might miss?
Yeah. So, I mean, a human coach, I don't think there's anything that our AI can do that a human coach couldn't do. But again, we can just do it a lot more fast. We can do it a lot more accurately. And so, like, for example, I remember when I was still coaching, I would spend an unbelievable amount of time calculating things like ratios of teacher talk to student talk. Where were kids raising their hands in the classroom? What kinds of questions are being asked in the classroom? Where do I see evidence of Danielson or some other framework in a lesson? I was just capturing that data, which then consumed all of the time that I could have been spending making deeper decisions about it. So our AI makes it really, really easy for you to upload any kind of artifact, whether that's a lesson recording, whether it's audio or video of a lesson, student work, the lesson plan, any of that sort of stuff, and then being able to sort of collate that based on all those kind of more quantitative data points that you might be looking for. Where do I see evidence of misconceptions in my student work? Upload all of it. Here's what the learning objective was. Oh, I see on pages 2, 3, and 7. This is sort of a trend in what's going on in the misconception. Where do I see that the teachers are sort of in the course of the lesson cycle getting off track from where they should be and they're losing time in the lesson? Those kinds of more quantitative things. It can then give you some suggestions of what you might do about it. I think at that point, that's really where the human coach becomes so much more valuable, because you're going to be able to customize it to what's really going on in the classroom.
So another issue that I know school districts are when adopting AI policies and practices is really looking at equity and bias. So what safeguards have you built into your platform to make sure that feedback is fair across the different content areas, grade levels, and culturally diverse classrooms?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and it's a complex answer that I'll try to distill down to something a little bit less boring. I guess I'll put it that way. But, a lot of the problems with bias in AI are because the algorithms that the AI is trained on can just sort of run wild on the data that they have access to. And so if the underlying training data is biased, then the output can be biased. So we've worked really hard to do two things. First, we've limited the access to do just auto training. So one of the things that we don't do that other larger AI platforms do is just tell our AI, hey, just keep getting better all the time, or keep changing your analysis all the time. Use unfettered access to all the data that our users are providing access to. We don't do any of that. So we created the guardrails to begin with in saying, like, don't train on data so that you're not then, the AI isn't then becoming more and more biased as it did. Kind of the famous example around this is early on, Twitter had an AI bot. This was 5 or 6 years ago, and it let it go wild. Twitter released the product. I don't even remember what it was called. And I mean, we all know what Twitter is like, right? And within 5 minutes, it was saying all this racist stuff and all these sorts of things. Well, it was because it was pulling all the tweets that had ever been written and trying to reproduce. We're not pulling all the things that have ever gone into Sibme where there may be human bias. We can't control for human bias, right? Yeah. There may be human bias that then would affect the output from the robot. But then the other part is the human guardrails that we put in. So we've done this already multiple times with gender, with race, with all kinds of information to cross check. So Sibme also has a virtual coaching service where we have coaches who are experienced educators who've worked all over the world, where we're having them make analyses of the same video that the AI is making analyses of and comparing those two things. So we can then retract it, make some changes, and put it back out there so that it's more accurate. And so we're always making those revisions over time with that constant view of making sure that we're providing sort of equitable analysis of what's going on in the classroom.
Yeah, I know that is very complex, so thank you for explaining that. Okay, so really big in schools is privacy and compliance. That's particularly in special education. So, can you explain a little bit about the safeguards that you have in place for schools with privacy laws?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is our bread and butter, right? I mean, long before Sibme was an AI company, we were the first scary platform in education, which was video, right? I mean, 10 years ago, teachers were very nervous about the concept of a video of their classroom being on the internet, period. And so we've been very serious about privacy from the get-go. We've been very serious about security from the get-go because we wanted to protect a teacher's trust in knowing that when they uploaded something from their lesson, that it was only going to be available to the people that they wanted to have access to it. And so it's all teacher driven. The Sibme platform is all teacher driven. It's really based on the teacher's willingness to open up their classroom to other people, providing data to other people. We set up all these different structures within our platform where we sort of start with the most private space, which is a private workspace, where a teacher can put things in their workspace, or any user who puts their things in their workspace is private to them. No one else can see it in the platform. It's password protected and encrypted. Create shared spaces in our platform where there's no hiding. It's fully transparent as to who has access to. So if I set up a shared space with you, Nikki, inside of our Sibme platform, but then the superintendent of our school district is the person who owns our platform, she can't see what we're doing inside of that shared space until we invite her in. And that's the other part of it. So I can own I mean, I have access to all of Sibme, right? But if I log in to somebody else's Sibme platform, unless I can pull a link from a video and click on it and all that sort of stuff. Unless they've actually shared that with me, I can't see it. So that same principle that's so important around those old worries around video and that sort of stuff is what guides our access to our AI. So I already talked about how we don't train on any data that's put into our platform without express permission from the specific user who shared it with us. We never just automatically train on that data. And also, we're very serious about with our AI, making sure that while we may still be storing that data, like, I upload the video, I get the report, or I get the Copilot's out, we store it on an entirely separate server from where our AI lives. So it's kind of like opening up the garage door, letting the AI look at what's going on, and then we shut it. We say, you got to delete everything. So we keep all that kind of segmented apart from one another to make it much more secure over time.
Interesting. Okay. So for an ed tech company, you guys have been around for a really long time. So I know that you have a lot of data to support all the work that you're doing. And I want to give you an opportunity to brag about the work that you're doing. I have bragged about you a lot, but I want this to come from you. So can you talk a little bit about the teacher retention rates, some of the goals that teachers have made and been able to accomplish themselves? Talk about some of the things that have been accomplished as a result of using this platform. I really want you to just brag for a little bit.
Okay. Well, I'm awful at it, so that's going to be hard for me. But I'm very good at looking at all the ways I can improve. But yeah, I mean, like one of my proudest moments actually was the person who spent quite a while working in public ed trying to deal with a serious problem with teacher turnover in a major urban school district where we had constant replacement of teachers and we were constantly losing teachers. And it was a big problem. It cost us a lot of money. It hurt kids because they had 3 teachers in a year, all those sorts of things. Teacher turnover is really, really important. And what we know from the research, you can go from TNTP all the way to university research. What we know is when teachers feel successful and supported, they stay. Those are the factors that
Mhm.
contribute to a teacher wanting to stay in the classroom. And one of my proudest moments working in the Sibme was when we had a new teacher at one of the schools that we support who at the end of the year told her principal, I was going to quit in December until I saw myself teach in September and at the end of the semester. And I saw how much it was. And you know, that feeling of we're so hard on teachers in this country. We're constantly talking about all the ways in which teachers are failing. And, you know, that's probably why I'm bad at bragging, right? Because I was built in that culture. Teachers do amazing things, right? If they could just see their success, then they'll stay. And the data supports my claim, right? So we have schools where they've reduced teacher turnover by upwards of 90%, 93%, where schools that are sort of engaging in this continuous process of self-reflection, continuous improvement, and celebrating success, that they just do not lose their teachers year over year. The teachers that are engaged in the process, they're hesitant to begin with, but then they just stay because they feel successful. And the student performance games are the same. We see time and time again, double digit gains, 15%, 20% gains year over year in literacy rates, in math numeracy rates, and all kinds of ways where students are doing so much better because they're being taught by a teacher who's serious about their own self.
I think another study that I read on your website, excuse me, losing my voice. Just a second. So another study on your website, I read there was significant improvements in classroom management. Was it over 60%
Yeah, so
reduction
we had a
in
percent
referrals?
reduction. Yeah, we've had schools where they've had massive reductions, so, 30, 40, 50, 60% in behavioral referrals and suspensions and expulsions because the teachers are just more aware of what's going on in their classroom and better. Yeah.
That's huge. I'm actually presenting at a national conference in November on the dangers of suspensions and expulsions. Did you know across the country, students lose 11 million days due to suspensions and expulsions?
I didn't know that number, but I'm not surprised. I've
Yeah.
been in schools where that's a huge problem. And I've been the person who gets sent the kid, right? And then has a conversation with them and is aware of the dynamics, the human dynamics between a teacher and a student that lead to those expulsions. And oftentimes, not all, but oftentimes it's a preventable solution. If both people can be on the same page with what's going on in the classroom. We've actually had situations where a kid will sit down and watch themselves in class and go, oh, now I get it. Okay. Those are the places where a very specific level where you're really being able to get to the crux of a teachable moment, that opportunity to say, here's what you could be doing differently to maximize the student's instruction, whether it's classroom management, instructional strategies, whatever that happens to be.
I love it. Okay, technical question that I get asked a lot. Teachers are busy people. They live bell to bell. I remember when I was in the classroom, There were days I didn't have time to eat lunch and didn't have time to go to the bathroom between classes. So realistically, how long does it take to upload a video, get feedback? So what does that process look like for a teacher who is participating in this?
Yeah, so Sibme is a fully integrated web and mobile application, so you can use any device to capture the audio recording or the video recording of what's going on in a lesson. And we've done a lot of work technically to make it possible to make it accessible to the AI, to another person as quickly as possible. When you record a video using your phone on the Sibme mobile app, we're uploading that recording as you're recording it. And so it usually takes a matter of seconds for that to be accessible on our platform, processed. The longest point is actually the transcription. That's the thing that takes the longest because we're detecting the language. Sibme is fluent in 144 different languages. And so we have to first detect the language, transcribe the video. But then once I've done that, it's just a couple minutes before they're able to then interact with it. So from soup to nuts, the whole process can take, if it's a short video, it can take a matter of minutes. If it's a longer video, like if you're blocked schedule and you're recording, a couple hours of lesson at a time, which by the way, I would never recommend that you do, not from a technical standpoint, but more from just the practical standpoint of like 2 hours of video is a lot of stuff there's a lot that can happen in 2 hours of lesson, but you could do it. And it would take maybe 20 minutes for the whole process to be done.
That's pretty quick. Okay, so if you're a district and you are looking at adopting Sibme as a tool to provide on-the-job support, what advice would you provide a district from things that you've learned? And also, what have you learned from mistakes in the past?
Yeah, so I think that the biggest mistake with most professional learning, to be honest with you, not just with the concept of using Sibme, but the biggest mistake that schools and districts make is they are data-driven, but the data that they're using to drive the kinds of professional learning that they need is not nuanced enough. And so my first advice is know what you want. Oftentimes we have school leaders who will say, I just want teachers to reflect. Well, that's a pretty broad, you could look at Pete Hall and Alyssa Simmerall have done tons of research on cultures of reflection. And just asking teachers to reflect is an insufficient direct, right? You need to give some context to reflection. So a lot of the work that we do when we start working with a school or with a district is we say, okay, what are the specific student outcomes that you want to change? What are the teacher behaviors that you want to change for those student outcomes? And then how are the systems set up? Are you doing PLCs? Or do you have instructional coaches? Are you bringing in our coaches? And then what's the job to be done by those people? That's kind of the first thing, is that people kind of broadly define, well, I need to implement HQ apps. Okay, well, implement how, with whom, do that thinking ahead of time. It makes such a big difference. But then the other thing, to quote someone smarter than me, I think the best advice with any sort of new initiative in schools is go slow to go fast, right? So don't do a whole bunch of stuff all at once. Going slow can look a lot of different ways depending on the culture. So it could be, well, we're going to start with a handful of teachers. We're going to start with a grade level. We're going to start with a department. But it could also be around the expectations. With Sibme specifically, the biggest mistake that people make, as I mentioned just a moment ago, is they record way too long of videos. And, the biggest mistake I made, the very first time I did Sibme, I had 40 teachers in my school. I said, hey, everybody, by Thursday, I want you to record your lesson and I want you to share it with me. And by Monday, I'm going to have watched all those lessons and give you feedback on all those lessons. Well, on Thursday at 3 p.m., I had 40 hours of video to watch by Monday, because they all recorded all of their class, right? Like I said, a lot happens in a class. Really what we're trying to do is it's like ESPN, right? Like we're trying to get down to that one little thing, that one little move that somebody could have done a little bit differently so that they can try that differently tomorrow. So what you should be doing is recording less, but record the right thing. So start again with, what am I trying to change in the classroom? What's the best evidence to capture the implementation of that? And then only capture that. So that's another way to go slow to go fast, is to just record short, small snippets of what's going on in the class so that you can really hone in on it. And then I'll stop after this. The hard part about that is the technical part, right? If that important thing is halfway through my class, what am I going to do? I'm going to stop teaching and go pull my phone out and start recording and all that sort of stuff. This is where our AI can be really, really groundbreaking, because I can record the whole lesson and then I can say to Sibme, hey, find the clip that's connected to differentiating instruction in this lesson. And it's going to pull that moment out and find those teachable moments without me having to manually look for them, so that we can get to that 30-second clip that we can use in our coaching conversation, that we can use in our PLC, that will really make a big difference in changing behavior in the classroom.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love the shorter, and I think that all of our listeners will like that too, because that's simple is better.
Yeah.
So this is my last question here. What do you think your districts that you've worked with over the years would say has been their biggest ROI from implementing the use of Sibme in their schools?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, I often wonder how people measure a return on investment, right? I think really when you think about the fact that you can spend between $9,000 and $21,000 to replace a teacher, if you're able to reduce teacher turnover by 90%, you're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars a year by not having to constantly replace those people, not having to constantly invest in onboarding their replacement every year. So that, sort of financial ROI is really, really valuable. I think when I was working in Houston, I would spend 50% of my week in a car driving from campus to campus. So that's another way in which you can save a ton of money, because you're not having to physically spend time not in classrooms. You can be in classrooms a lot more frequently, and then through that, be more effective in sort of the work that you're doing, whether you're a coach, you're an administrator, whether you're teachers who now aren't having to get subs to watch another teacher teach to do lesson study or whatever that happens to be. That's another big return. But ultimately, I think that the return is the community. I think that schools are really lonely places for the people who work in them. That what we do typically in schools is we say, here are the keys to your classroom. We'll see you in May. And, oh, by the way, we're going to have a PLC meeting on Wednesday at 2:00. You're going to be exhausted. You're not going to be engaged. Oh, we may have a faculty meeting once a month or something like that. There's very little opportunity for teachers to work together. And if we can create structures, and I think Sibme is a really powerful tool for doing that, then what you do is you create this more collective approach to teaching on a campus. And to me, that's the return. The return is, there's not a financial, sort of measurement for that, but it is my philosophical belief that if teachers could just be more connected to one another, schools would be completely different places.
So that's amazing. So I saw the platform and immediately loved the platform. But then when I talked to you, I knew that our values aligned. That right there is in perfect alignment with the values of my company, because what I really wanted to do was give teachers a feeling of belonging in schools. I think it's so important that everybody feels like school is a place where I belong. And I think that is recognizing that everyone's professional learning is important. We expect teachers to personalize learning for every student in their classroom. And then often we provide professional development that is once and done and one size fits all for teachers and for administrators. And I don't think that's fair. I was a special education teacher, and I don't know how many PD days I sat through that I was like, I don't know that this pertains to me or any of my kids. But personalizing learning for everybody creates that feeling of belonging and that somebodyness, that my learning, my professional learning goals, that matters to somebody. It matters that I grow and that I learn, and that is passed on to my students. And I think that you're right. How is that ROI measured other than those teachers stay? Well, thank you, TJ. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast, and really excited to see this partnership grow and blossom. I think that we're going to do amazing things together. To learn more about this partnership, please feel free to email me at nikki@inclusiveleadershiplab.org or go to the website. And really look forward to talking more about it as we move forward. We will be working closely with Sibme, and there's a lot more to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. It's been great chatting with you today. And yes, I couldn't agree more that it's a wonderful partnership. We're really excited to continue to find new ways to make schools more inclusive places.